When people mention Germany, they usually think of Europe's economic powerhouse, the country that produces world-famous automobile brands and renowned heavy industrial complexes. Yet behind that glamorous facade, an unprecedented crisis is quietly eating away at the country from within. A wave of citizens, skilled workers, and business owners are quietly packing their bags and leaving the country. And you know what? The number of German citizens leaving the country has reached nearly 290,000 in just 1 year. Why is this economic heart of Europe gradually losing the powerful appeal it once had? What is choking off opportunities and pushing young people and the country's brightest talent to pack up and leave in search of a freer, more open future, particularly in the United States? Let's step into a journey to explore the harsh reality of 10 declining cities in Germany and uncover the deeper reasons behind this turbulent wave of migration. Going back to the early 20th century, if you were looking for a true industrial heart of Europe, Chemnitz would have been at the top of the list. It was once compared to a giant money-printing machine, a true Saxon Manchester, with mechanical engineering and textile factories operating at full capacity day and night. Yet history seems unwilling to let places that once became too self-confident off the hook. World War II came through, leaving nearly 40% of the city flattened to the ground. Then the socialist era arrived, giving the city the name Karl-Marx-Stadt as a symbol of iron determination. You can imagine people struggling to rebuild everything from the rubble, only for the shock of 1990 to hit when the Berlin Wall fell. State-owned factories that had once been a source of pride suddenly became outdated in the face of the global market whirlwind. Just as many industrial towns in the United States struggled when manufacturing plants shut down, young people, skilled engineers, and the elite in Chemnitz had no reason to stay and bury their youth there. They packed their bags and left, flocking to Leipzig, Dresden, or escaping to Western Germany. What did they leave behind? Gray prefabricated apartment blocks and a demographic structure that had grown frighteningly old. And then, the story became more ironic than ever, as people tried to use culture to salvage an economy that was already brain-dead. Chemnitz being named European Capital of Culture under the slogan, "See the Unseen," may sound impressive, but it seems more like a hurried layer of makeup applied to the pale face of a terminally ill patient. Do you really think a handful of music festivals or a few contemporary art projects can fill abandoned apartment buildings or save an unemployment rate that is threatening to explode? Probably not. Once curious tourists leave after taking a few Instagram check-in photos, what the city is still facing is a cold, hard reality, silent factories, and a generation of young people that seems to have forgotten the way back home. Using art to patch up an economy that is bleeding at its core seems to be nothing more than a way for people to convince themselves that everything is still fine, while the ship is actually sinking deeper by the day. If you are looking for a name that once dominated Europe's footwear and leather industry, Pirmasens is an undisputed symbol. The city once saw itself as a center of power that set trends across the continent, much like the way famous American shoe brands once dominated the domestic market. The city thrived, breathed, and grew day by day thanks to the enormous flow of money pouring in from the leather tanneries and shoe factories packed closely together. Tens of thousands of workers had stable jobs. The streets were filled with the sound of sewing machines, and a sense of industrial pride seemed impossible to shake. But life does not always go according to plan, and the lesson of relying on a single industry seems to be equally bitter every time. Starting in the 1970s, when a wave of cheap goods and footwear from abroad began flooding the market, the major business owners in Pirmasens seemed to have little interest in staying to fight or modernize their technology. Instead, they chose what seemed like the smarter capitalist move: flee, shut down the factories, and move production to places with dirt-cheap labor costs in order to protect their own wallets. What did they leave behind? Row after row of massive leather and shoe factories suddenly turned into cold, concrete graves, with their windows completely sealed shut. Much like the desolate scenes in many towns across America's Rust Belt, the city fell into a seemingly inescapable cycle of structural decline, leaving generation after generation stranded amid outdated memories of the past. And the current picture may make you shake your head in frustration at what is supposedly Europe's prosperity. The unemployment rate in Pirmasens stubbornly remains around 15%, one of the highest and most persistent rates in Germany. Per capita income has sunk to the bottom of the national rankings, serving as powerful evidence of just how risky it can be to cling to a one-horse economy when the world changes. On the banks of the Oder River near the Polish border, people once built a perfect dream called Eisenhüttenstadt as the ultimate symbol of the new industrial urban model under East Germany, GDR. The city was meticulously planned down to the last centimeter according to 16 rigid principles, much like the way major corporations try to build automated assembly plants. Then, the Berlin Wall fell, and Germany entered reunification in 1990, bringing painful reality checks for subsidized economies. Under the fierce pressure of global market competition, steel giant Arcelor stepped in to take over and carried out a ruthless large-scale purge. The number of workers plunged from 12,000 to just 2,700 almost overnight. The chain reaction immediately triggered a terrifying exodus of people. The city's population plummeted from its peak of around 53,000 to less than half that number. Much like the devastation seen in many American industrial towns that lost their jobs, Eisenhüttenstadt suddenly became a desolate place where silent rows of buildings stared at one another in despair. And the story became more ironic than ever when the decline created a bizarre technical paradox. The population became sparse, but the enormous infrastructure system, from wastewater and heating pipelines to transportation networks, had still been designed for tens of thousands of people and had to be maintained. The result? Per capita maintenance costs skyrocketed, while the flow of water through the pipes became too weak to clean them naturally, creating the risk of blockages and pollution right in the heart of the city. The local government seemingly had no choice but to adopt an extremely ironic solution called smart shrinkage, which essentially meant taking a sledgehammer to its own buildings. Numerous high-rise Plattenbau apartment blocks built before 1990 were ruthlessly demolished to prevent the city from becoming a complete ghost town. During the Cold War, if you needed to find a place producing everything from PVC, dyes, fertilizers, and pesticides to serve East Germany's ambitions for centralized industrialization, Bitterfeld-Wolfen were right at the center of it all. This place was once known as the largest chemical hub in Eastern Europe, but the price paid for that frenzy was perhaps more terrifying than anything in a Hollywood disaster movie. There was no need for strict environmental protection standards. The region simply earned the unwanted title of one of the most heavily polluted and toxic areas in Europe. The sky here seemed to always carry the dull gray color of coal smoke, while the air was so thick with sulfur that people said one breath was enough to taste metal on the tip of your tongue. Then time passed. The old factories collapsed, and by 2007, the authorities were forced to merge the two cities simply to cut the minimum administrative costs needed to keep the government machinery running. To make amends with nature, the government poured billions of euros into large-scale ecological restoration projects aimed at cleaning up the land and water. Just look at Lake Goich today. What was once a massive open-pit coal mine has now been transformed into a beautiful system of crystal-clear artificial lakes, picturesque enough to look like a travel postcard and impressive enough to win numerous international environmental planning awards. But ironically, no matter how green the landscape becomes, it cannot hide the fact that people are leaving. You can admire the lake, but a lake cannot pay the electricity bill or afford you a decent dinner. Nature seems to be trying to revive itself on the corpse of an old industrial economy, while the social heart of the city appears to have been clinically dead for a long time. And just when people thought high technology would save everything, another twist emerged. Some modern chemical and pharmaceutical companies began investing again, attracted by the abundant land and cleaned-up infrastructure. Sounds promising. Much like the way America's technology hubs grew in Silicon Valley, right? But here is the problem. These high-tech factories do not need tens of thousands of ordinary workers like they once did. They need specialized college degrees, top-level experts, and an extremely small workforce. As a result, the vast majority of older working-class people, who had spent their lives tied to the machines and toxic chemicals of the past, were left completely on the sidelines of development. What was the result? Rows of Plattenbau apartment blocks were torn down in a ragged fashion, creating missing tooth gaps that seemed to mock the heart of the city. Looking at them, people may realize a bitter lesson. No matter how well the trees grow or how clean the air becomes, that greenery can never fill the grayness of poverty, unemployment, and neglect. Let's look at Gelsenkirchen, the city that once proudly carried the name City of a Thousand Fires, to see just how far an industrial monument can slide into irreversible decline, and why this place inadvertently claimed the bottom ranking for quality of life in Germany. In the past, it was known as Stadt der Tausend Feuer, City of a Thousand Fires, thanks to its massive coal mines and coke ovens that glowed day and night. The heavy fuel produced here once served as a lifeline, directly contributing to Germany's post-war economic miracle, the Wirtschaftswunder. Much like the way the steel and coal complexes of U.S. Steel and Bethlehem Steel once helped propel America to the top of the world, residential communities sprang up densely around the mines, creating an intensely proud working-class identity. For generations, being a miner was never merely a means of making a living. It was honor, strength, and the foundation of a family's prosperity. Yet history does not seem to favor those who become too dependent on the past. After decades of struggling with decline, the city's last coal mine finally closed in 2018, extinguishing the traditional fires completely and wiping out the original reason for the city's existence. And the hard reality struck immediately and without mercy. In a nationwide study of quality of life indicators in Germany, Gelsenkirchen was pushed straight to the bottom, officially ranking 401st out of 401 cities. The city inadvertently became the starkest reflection of the dead end facing modern urban life. This was followed by an exodus of the middle class and younger workers, causing the population to evaporate from a peak of nearly 400,000 to only around 260,000, leaving behind a barren and exhausted social structure. The unemployment rate stubbornly remains around 15%, 3 times the national average, while depleted budgets have turned many streets into open-air garbage dumps and left public facilities abandoned like battlefields. Even more painfully, the collapse spread to the sports symbol FC Schalke 04, the legendary soccer club that had once been the ultimate source of pride and the final spiritual bond holding the community together. As the team repeatedly sank deeper into financial crisis and suffered relegation, it became an almost painfully stark mirror of the collapse of the entire urban ecosystem. Thanks to a rare stroke of luck that spared it from the destruction of bombing during World War II, Görlitz now stands like a living architectural museum in the real world, with more than 4,000 historic landmarks preserved to an almost unbelievable degree, spanning the Renaissance, Baroque, and Art Nouveau periods. Its old world, romantic, and quiet beauty quickly caught the attention of major Hollywood directors. The city was once chosen as a filming location for a series of internationally acclaimed blockbuster movies, such as The Grand Budapest Hotel, Inglourious Basterds, and The Reader. And so, the name Görlitz was born as a proud comparison. The cobblestone squares and magnificent rows of historic buildings once created a perfect illusion of a prosperous, wealthy city and a cultural pride of Eastern Germany's border region. Sounds poetic, doesn't it? It looks almost like a purpose-built set designed to please anyone who loves nostalgia for the past. And yet, despite possessing million-dollar scenery straight out of a painting, Görlitz's financial reality is bleak to an alarming degree. Per capita income here is only around 2/3 of the national average, placing it among the lowest in Germany. And what is the consequence of that prolonged economic decline? The city is carrying around 7,000 vacant apartments with no residents, a massive number creating dead spaces right in the middle of historic neighborhoods. Young workers, full of energy, are constantly packing their bags and leaving to seek opportunities to live and work in larger centers such as Berlin or Dresden. As a result, Görlitz has gradually been pushed into a severe demographic crisis, turning the city into something resembling a miniature open-air retirement home. Suhl's situation is quite similar to what is happening in Pirmasens. Thanks to its production of sporting weapons, hunting rifles, and mechanical products, the city was once considered a major industrial center. But you know how it goes. When you put all your eggs in one basket, sooner or later you have to pay the price. The shock of German reunification in 1990 and the wave of rapid privatization turned the state-owned factories that had once been a source of pride into outdated relics under the competitive pressure of the global market economy. A series of bankruptcies followed in rapid succession, bringing large-scale and ruthless layoffs. And when sources of income suddenly evaporated, the young people and intellectual class in Suhl had no reason to stay behind and chew on the past. They packed their bags en masse and left the valley in search of opportunities to live and work in major cities in Western Germany or more dynamic economic centers, much like people abandoning dying industrial towns in the United States. The consequences became painfully obvious. The working, age, and childbearing population declined dramatically, forcing numerous kindergartens and educational facilities in Suhl to close permanently due to the absence of children's laughter. The town's population chart suddenly turned into a haunting curve plunging straight downward. Welcome to Hof. This area in the far northeastern part of Bavaria carried a heavy geopolitical mission throughout the tense era of a divided world. Located right along the border between the two Germanies, Hof was not simply a provincial town. It was positioned as a forward fortress, a critically important checkpoint of the free world. Because of its vulnerable peripheral location, the city was sustained by a special border subsidy system known as Zonrenförderung from the federal government. The flow of subsidized money ran steadily like blood through a body, helping traditional commercial and industrial activities operate smoothly. At the time, Hof's prosperity was partly backed by the state budget, creating the illusion of an economic center as solid as a rock. Yet the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 brought an atmosphere of freedom to all of Germany, while at the same time signing the death warrant for Hof's privileged position. The border was thrown wide open, and the title of Special Front Line suddenly vanished. Over time, the generous subsidies also quietly drained away the city's source of oxygen. The backbone of the city's economy, the traditional textile industry, immediately faced a devastating blow from the free market. How could an outdated production structure withstand the pressure when, right across the border, there was an abundance of extremely cheap labor and neighboring markets were rapidly emerging? The whirlwind of competition swept through, turning long-established factories into empty lots. A chain of bankruptcies followed, leaving a gaping hole in the local employment structure and people's sources of income. The most ironic part is that Hof is not located in some desolate wasteland, but in Bavaria, the massive and one of the wealthiest economic engines in Germany, a place often associated with soaring GDP and widespread prosperity. Yet that picture seems not to shine into this forgotten corner. Hof suddenly became a forgotten child, sinking into a slow, seemingly endless cycle of decline. From a small, sleepy agricultural town, Hoyerswerda suddenly transformed into a massive brown coal mining complex, centered around the enormous Schwarze pump facility. Crowds of people poured in for work, pushing the population from just a few thousand to a peak of nearly 72,000 inches, a relatively short period of time. To fit all those people into one place, planners launched an experimental planning revolution, turning it into the first city in East Germany built entirely from prefabricated concrete blocks, Plattenbau, stacked together like enormous shoeboxes. It looked modern and orderly, much like the way affordable housing projects sprang up across the United States after World War II. Standing before the endless rows of bleak gray concrete apartment blocks at the time, people once believed this was the glorious future of the working class. Yet every bubble that is inflated eventually bursts. When the Berlin Wall fell and the market economy moved in, inefficient brown coal mines could not withstand the pressure of global competition. Tens of thousands of jobs vanished in the blink of an eye, triggering a historic exodus from a place that no longer seemed to have a future. Hoyerswerda's population plunged uncontrollably from a peak of more than 70,000 to fewer than 32,000, and it continues to shrink day by day. Ironically, the average age here has reached 53, a red alert figure showing the extreme degree of population aging. The Plattenbau buildings that once echoed with laughter are now being demolished en masse because no one lives in them anymore, leaving overgrown vacant lots in the middle of the city. And when a city loses its economic lifeline, the social consequences that follow are often bitter. The wave of migration that swept through here left behind a wound that is difficult to heal. Young women were the first to pack their bags and leave Hoyerswerda in search of educational and employment opportunities in larger cities in Western Germany, refusing to tie their lives to an industrial wasteland that had already passed its golden age. The result was a severe gender imbalance, creating a community of mostly older single men living lonely lives among cold, decaying concrete apartment complexes. Nestled along the winding Lenne River Valley in North Rhine-Westphalia, Altena once established itself on the global economic map as a center for the production of cables, screws, and traditional mechanical products, supplying core components to Germany's heavy industrial network. The town was once alive with the sound of running machinery and the hustle and bustle of skilled workers. Yet every golden age eventually comes to an end. Despite having picturesque valley scenery and an old castle perched on a hilltop, Altena experienced a severe economic downturn, losing as much as one-third of its population as traditional factories closed one after another, or moved production elsewhere in search of lower costs. Countless shops along the main streets went out of business. Vacant apartments increased at a staggering rate, and the town was pushed to the brink of becoming a genuine ghost town, where an eerie silence began to take over deserted street corners. Amid this dead end, at the height of the European migration crisis in 2015, the city's mayor at the time, Andreas Holstein, made a move that stunned all of Germany. He voluntarily registered Altena to accept a number of refugees far exceeding the quota allocated by the federal government. This groundbreaking decision was largely driven by a practical calculation to make use of the many vacant apartments, fill demographic gaps, and hopefully bring new workers into the valley to help revive the town. Yet reality on the streets is always harsher than that. Despite receiving quite a few international awards for its hospitality, Altena still seemed unable to prevent shops from sitting dark and closed in broad daylight simply because residents had too little purchasing power. You cannot maintain a thriving retail economy when consumers do not have a steady flow of cash from employment in their pockets. On top of that, society here has also had to bear heavy pressure from generational and cultural differences. Bridging the gap and promoting integration between a predominantly elderly local population and newcomers from completely different cultural backgrounds has never been easy. The gamble in Altena ultimately exposed a bitter lesson. Temporary solutions designed to fill empty homes or adjust demographics on paper can never automatically replace genuine economic revitalization and a strong labor market. So, we have now gone through 10 troubled cities in Germany. Do you feel that this country seems to be split into two completely separate worlds? On one side are glamorous global cities, while on the other are declining areas slowly destroying themselves because of the demographic crisis, suffocating tax burdens, deteriorating public services, and frighteningly high energy prices. When capable people, intellectuals, and entrepreneurs face tax burdens rising to as much as 50%, suffocating bureaucracy, and pervasive social pessimism, their search for more dynamic horizons, such as the freedom to do business and build wealth in the United States, long-term stability in Switzerland, or a tax-free environment in the UAE, ultimately becomes nothing more than an unavoidable economic necessity. What do you think about the wave of migration and the decline of these industrial towns? Will Germany find a more viable way out, or is this simply the common fate of major economies? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next sharp analysis of the global economy.